Hey folks, welcome in. My name is Glenda. I'm a member of the Firestorm Collective, and it's great to be here with you tonight as we host tonight's event beyond AANHPI Heritage Month, featuring a conversation between authors Gayatri Sethi, Adiba Jaigirdar, and Celeste Mohammed. For folks not familiar, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a now 14-year-old worker-owned cooperative and radical bookstore in so-called Asheville, North Carolina, on the traditional lands of Cherokee people. We're a general interest bookstore that are more well-known for our eclectic mix of titles related to feminism, anarchism, queerness, social movements, and other radical politics. We ship books all across the country. If you haven't checked us out, our full catalog is available on our website, which I will drop links to in the chat. Firestorm is also a community event space. However, since the start of the pandemic, we've transitioned entirely to an online virtual space, and we'll continue hosting virtual events like the one you're attending tonight until we feel it is safe to do so. We host lots of events in collaboration with indie publishers and have some pretty rad online reading groups lined up. So if you're interested in staying informed about events happening through Firestorm, I'll also drop a link to our community calendar in the chat. A note for those attending in the live audience, there will be time at the end of tonight's conversation for Q&A. So if you're interested in asking a question at any point, I encourage you to submit them throughout the discussion by using the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen if you're attending on Zoom, or in the comments if you're following along on the Facebook live stream. And our speakers will do their best to respond. So I will let the speakers introduce themselves. And I guess if you would like to start, Gayatri.
Thank you so much, Firestorm, for hosting us. It's truly a joy and pleasure to join you. And thank you, Glenda, for all of the planning and work that you've done behind the scenes to host us today. I'm Gayatri, and I wrote a book called Unbelonging, in part to answer the question about heritage, since we're here to speak about Heritage Months. And I would like to begin by doing a short reading, and then I'll call on Celeste to read after I do, by way of introduction. Why identify? Identity matters. We see color. We are not invisible. We are not ether. Race is a construction, and race has real life ramifications. Name all the intersections. If we do not say who we are, if we do not claim all ourselves, we will be erased. We need to see how we are differently placed before we can claim to all be one human race. Identify. Naming is healing. For those of us who are wounded by weaponized unbelonging, even by those who share identities with us, there is a deep healing power in learning to name and identify ourselves. Words matter. There are words that disown. There are words that other. There are words that are weaponized. And there are words that offer hope, safety, and solidarity. So I identify as someone of South Asian heritage who is a member of both the Asian and African diasporas, and I reside on the sacred lands of the Muskogee Creek peoples, and I am the mother of multiracial Black children. So those are some of my identifications. Celeste?
Hi everyone. Thanks to Firestorm for arranging this. Thanks to Gayatri and Adiba for being here. And I have to say that this is a real honor for me because in many ways it's a first. My name is Celeste. I didn't say it before I started. My name is Celeste Mohammed. That's not my married name. That is my maiden name. I am what we would call in the Caribbean a dogla, meaning I am half of Indo-Caribbean heritage. My mother is Indian, Indo-Caribbean, and my father is a mix of other things, predominantly Black. So I'm mixed race. I grew up in a very Indo-centric home, and it was odd to be raised by Indian woman, raised to be an Indian woman, but not be one at the same time. And so when my book came out, my book Pleasantview, when it came out last year, I really didn't know what to expect. It covers pretty much all the races available and the ethnicities available or that live in Trinidad. I did not know what to expect, how it would be received in the world. And I was so pleasantly surprised to find that the book has become quite well received in West Africa, some regions of West Africa. There is supposed to be a West African edition coming out soon, but I haven't really experienced the same literary welcome from the Southeast Asian community. So this is my first event, being invited by a member of that community, and I'm very happy to be here. And I just want to read a little bit from Pleasantview for you. It's about a boy named Omar who is a little confused about who he is and where he is in the world. It was now dark outside. Through the chicken wire, under a low swinging bulb, Omar saw Mr. Jagu, Mani, Dev, and his father, Mr. Singh. They sat on crates, crouched over a small table, eating. When Omar opened the door, Mr. Jagu dumped a big dollop of curry onto a plate and pointed to the roti they were using to cradle the bony pieces of meat and sop up the sauce. Boy, you from the country, you must like wild meat. Omar remained in the doorway, crusty-eyed and slack-jawed, until Mr. Jagu beckoned again. Only then did Omar peel himself from the doorframe and accept the plate. He didn't know what else to do. Everyone was staring at him. He popped a morsel into his mouth and chewed slowly, assessing the meat. Iguana. In Matura, they were everywhere, like chickens. Silence seemed to hum around the table, and Omar knew the men were waiting for him to show some manners, to compliment the food. In Matura, we just curry guana, he half whispered, but it don't taste nice so. Everyone nodded, and Mr. Jagu credited Mani and Dev for catching the animals. It is hunt, Omar? Mani asked. Omar took time clearing his teeth, calculating his reply. He felt disoriented. Was he really sitting here among these men? Had they really come seeking him? Mr. Jagu must have told them how he'd helped earlier today. They were all trying with him now. He had to try too, the way Josephine, his mother, had said. Hunt, he answered at last. Yeah, I used to go in the forest with them fellas, catch we little wild meat, do we little fishing and thing. Everyone grinned and swapped looks that Omar couldn't read. He'd only ever been on one job interview, but this felt very similar. Eventually, Mr. Singh blurted out, well, all these months we watching you, quiet, going home every weekend, avoiding everybody. We say you's a born-again Christian, Georgina, and Jagu, but we ain't know you is a real man, a hunting man. I'll stop it. Adiba?
Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here and to be speaking to both of you. So I am Adiba Jaigirdar. I am the author of The Henna Wars and also Hawaiian Issues Guide to Fake Dating. I write mostly young adult novels, and I like to explore the queer, Muslim, South Asian identity in my books, again, specifically for young people. I am of South Asian descent. Specifically, I am from Bangladesh. And I also reside in Ireland, which is where I immigrated when I was young. So I am both Bangladeshi and Irish. I hold citizenship of both those countries. So technically, I am not actually AANHPI. I am not American in any sense, but we can get into that a little bit later, I guess. I'm also going to read a little bit from my most recently published book, which is called Hawaiian Issues Guide to Fake Dating. And just for some context, this book is about these two girls who are both Bengali, and they decide to fake date. And at this point in the book, one of the characters has just left a party because she's faced a little bit of Islamophobia. And so this is what happens after that. We don't blast at the party for a particularly long time. Trying to ignore everyone's snide remarks and side eye is pretty difficult when it's all you're dealing with. And Dee and Aisling don't even acknowledge me for the rest of the night, like I haven't been their best friend for years. The cake hasn't even been brought out by the time Ishu and I take our leave, quietly sidling out of the front door, leaving the loud thumping of the music behind us. Nobody seems to notice us leaving. Nobody seems to care. Least of all Aisling and Dee. I should call Amma. I slip the phone out of my pocket. Before I can give my thumbprint, Ishu places her hand on mine, closing it over the phone. It's a nice night, she says. Maybe we can walk. My house isn't too far from here. But you can stay over if you want, Ishu shrugs, like she doesn't care either way, which is not exactly the best way to be invited to spend the night at someone's. Still, I can tell Ishu really does want me to stay over from the way she slumps her shoulder and looks away, like she doesn't want to look too eager about it. Sure, I say, that would be okay, I guess. It's nice to actually be invited somewhere after tonight's disaster. She smiles, and my breath hitches at the sight of it. She smiles so rarely that each one, the genuine ones that light up her entire being, feels like a gift, like something private she has only reserved for me. Come on then, follow me. She turns and begins to lead the way. We're both in heels, wearing flimsy dresses. Even though the night is surprisingly nice now, clear and cool, we're not exactly dressed for a walk. When we're far enough away that we can't hear the party anymore, and instead we're surrounded by the sounds of the nighttime, silence broken by the soft whooshing of the wind and the sound of leaves rustling, Ishu finally speaks. Can I ask you a question? I guess. I'm a little afraid to hear her question, especially since she is looking ahead instead of meeting my gaze. Why do you never curse? I don't know what kind of question I expected, but it definitely wasn't this. I can't help the giggle that escapes my lips. Ishu looks at me with a raised eyebrow and an amused glint in her eyes. It's a serious question, she insists. I've been curious. Well, because I'm Muslim, I explain once my giggles have died down. What? Ishu actually looks a little taken aback. Considering everything that happened at the party just a few hours ago, I don't think she should be. Yeah, I say slowly. It's just something that's important for me, like going to the mosque for Jummah during school holidays and reading the Quran every weekend. I'm assuming your friends don't know this stuff about you. Ishu says it less like a question, more like a fact. A feeling of shame blooms somewhere deep inside my chest, but I try to push it down. No, they don't need to know, I shrug. Why? She sounds genuinely curious. She even steps closer, so our fingers are almost brushing against each other as we talk, like she doesn't want to miss a word I say. Well, I don't want to be too much, Ishu blinks at me slowly. I can't ever imagine you being too much. I chuckle. I mean, like, I don't want to be too Muslim. I don't know where the line is that you cross over to be too much. Once you cross it, people start acting like you're different and weird, and then you're the outsider. Like what happened today? Ishu asks. There's a tinge of sympathy in her voice that fills me with discomfort. I rub my elbows with my hands, even though it's not really that cold anymore. Yeah, I guess. You should be able to be yourself with your friends. If being Muslim is important to you, you should be able to share that with them, Ishu says. It's not that easy. I shake my head. Ishu doesn't get it. Ishu is the type of person who doesn't care what other people think of her. That's why we're here, pretending to date each other, because Ishu needs to pretend she cares what other people think of her. But she's never had to stretch herself, change herself, bend herself to fit in where she doesn't belong.
I loved those excerpts so much. Celeste, I'm curious if you had a question that you wanted to start us off with for the discussion part.
Not a question so much as when I was thinking about this conversation, you know, I was talking to a few people. Sometimes it's nice to remind myself of that I'm, you know, I'm not alone, and to talk to the various people that I know and who would share with me openly. And one of them reminded me of something that is a fact, but just a fact that I just had forgotten, but it bears repeating now and for us all to be reminded as we start this discussion. The fact was, this person reminded me, this person is an anthropologist, and he reminded me that, you know, Southeast Asian migration, if you want to call it that, to the Western world has happened in waves. The most recent being, we all know, the professional class, lots of doctors and professors and tech people and all of that. But the earliest wave, the very earliest wave of Southeast Asian migration to this part of the world, to the Americas, was actually the Indo-Caribbean journey in Indian indentured immigration way back in 1838 for 79 years, you know. So that's like the first and the oldest established Southeast Asian community in the Americas. And yet, if you talk to anyone, most people of in the Caribbean, descent in the Caribbean, who have had the opportunity to interact with Southeast Asians from outside the Caribbean, they will tell you it is a hurtful experience to realize that we're not often considered part of the diaspora. Yeah, and that's what this person had reminded me of, and he said it with a lot of hurt. He said, you know, it's a fact. We are the oldest Southeast Asian community, but they don't treat us like we're part of it. And I said, yeah, you know, that's true. That is true. It's a fact.
It really is. And, you know, this month is so complicated for so many reasons, including this, that for many of us, it brings up hurt of historic erasure. Yes, you know, when I see the lists that come out during this month, when I see, you know, which books are amplified as exemplary and so on, the Indo-Caribbean experience is lacking and missing entirely. And so I concur, I have made that same observation. And it's heartbreaking because we do know better. We do know. And yet we persist in this willful erasure, and it's not okay. I'm not okay with it. And that's why we're in conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I've also definitely noticed like the erasure. Actually, like specifically, yes, definitely Indo-Caribbeans, but I think specifically like anybody who is like mixed Black and South Asian, that erasure is so stark. Even, you know, there are some really big, popular, best-selling authors who are Black and South Asian, and they are always missing from these lists. but they're often, included in lists of Black authors, which is amazing. They should be. But I think it's just so obvious that they're not being included in the wider idea of what the diaspora is. And it definitely speaks of, anti-Blackness, which is where I think the Indo-Caribbean erasure comes from as well.
I don't know if anybody has seen it, but at one point in my life, I did watch Netflix's show, Indian Matchmaking.
Oh.
And there's a girl on there who is of Indo-Caribbean descent, Guyanese. And that was her whole point, that she found it so difficult to date. She lived in America now, but she found it so difficult to date because the moment some Southeast Asian man hears that she is from the Caribbean, that's her heritage, they are no longer interested. So, that's like a popular culture thing. I know many people have deep feelings about that show, but it is what it is, as they say.
Yeah, I feel like part of the conversation, since I grew up in the African continent, on the East and Southern Africa, in community with folks who were descended of indentured folks. And, one of my observations, in addition to echoing what Adiba said about the anti-Blackness, when we're talking about AANHPI, the very categorization is requiring of us a single identification, which to me is a function of white supremacist ideologies, right? And then for us being in diaspora, each of us in our unique ways, one of the other things that, especially when we're talking about the South Asian diaspora, is we have to talk about caste also, because historically, whether it was colonial forces that indenturehood separated from the mainland in time and space, and now that separation is still lived, and in many ways it's lived trauma. What also I think is that hidden message in that communication by the Guyanese person is that very often people from the mainland do exercise a certain kind of casteism towards folks from the Caribbean. And that even all of these hundreds of years later, those caste ideologies are still very rigid. And so, this month to me is an opportunity to really complicate how we can put such a complex diaspora together in one kind of categorization, and give us 1 month to talk about our heritage, when in reality there's so much lived trauma and continued hurt, as we have named. I struggle with this.
I think what we're doing here is so valuable because, as Adiba was saying, I have experienced it. I have other friends, writers in the literary community. I'm thinking actually about another Trinidadian who she's Douglas like me, but looks a little different. Her father is in the Caribbean person, whereas my mother was. But anyway, she's a very successful writer in her genre, in her field. And she and I once had a conversation where she said, and something that I've experienced since, where there are all these magazines. You have this resurgence of Southeast Asian pride and Desi pride and all of that. There are all these magazines and opportunities. She's American. And when she would send in work, she would be told in a nice way, well, this isn't for you. This is not for you. You don't qualify based on her mixed heritage. And it's kind of hard, to accept that. And part of the hurt too is that these people, these indentured people, they came here, yes, but I wish you could understand how hard they tried to hold on to their culture, to their food. I mean, they look back even now so longingly toward the subcontinent, in food and dress and customs. And of course, there was some acculturation, to the local conditions. But there was always such a longing to reconnect, and that is why it is often very hurtful when they do actually have an opportunity to reconnect and they receive like with exclusion. So
yeah, I think that's why I find this month so frustrating in a way, because I think what it often does, and you know, it's not meant to do this, but what it often does is it flattens our experiences and it kind of narrows us into this one like identity. Whereas what it should do is celebrate like our diversity and our nuances and our depths. And part of that is like being South Asian in South Asian, being South Asian in the diaspora, being South Asian in the Caribbean, you know, all of these different things. But we almost have to try and fit ourselves into the narrow box that has been created for us. And that's white supremacy, as Gayatri said.
power to name, huh? The power to name and to define and to draw nice compartments.
Right. And who does that serve, though? You know, I often ask, you know, what is the purpose of this month? What is the purpose of this Heritage Month in the context of ongoing violences against, you know, people who are minoritized, including people of Asian American people, right? That violence takes all kinds of forms, not just blatant violence that makes the nightly news, right? So in the context of that, you know, I often wonder what is the purpose of that, you know, and yes, we get flattened out. We are supposed to choose only one of our identities, right? Not all of ourselves. And then we have to make a case to whom that we are valid. And all of that, there's a performative element, I feel, and it makes me really uncomfortable, to be honest. And over the years, you know, I just brace myself when May comes. I'm just like, oh, what performative theatrics are we going to see this month? And sure enough, they happen. And I'm like, oh, Lord, please, I refuse to perform my identities for a white gaze. I refuse that. So if it means that I'm not going to make it on your lists, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny the thing you said about the months, because it's like, okay, so what do I do? Do I celebrate February? What has been funny is because since the book has come out, right? So I'm a member of an alumni association in the US. And of course they're in the US, so they're very into these months, discrete months, right? So for February, they you know, they try to celebrate you know, past students who fit into the various months. So for February, they're like, well, you know, they celebrate me in February. Okay. May rolls around and, well, of course, they don't consider me Asian. So nothing. But then June is coming, Caribbean America. So it's like, so why do we need to do this? In order to appreciate people, you know? I don't, and the same guy I was talking to, this anthropologist who's helping me with my new book, he told me he studied in the US and he just never knew what box to tick. Yeah.
All of them. You know, I have similar conversations with my children who share identities with you, Celeste, as we've discussed.
Yeah.
And I tell them, you know, you were everything. You were all of the above. Check all the boxes. You know, and then I wrote a verse to that effect in the book. And yet, you know, I think, especially because I used to work on college campuses, it's especially a thing in universities and colleges where, you know, these heritage months, you know, exist. So I also want to honor that these heritage months exist because, you know, blood was shed in the civil rights movement, and especially by our Black kin who made it so that we could have a Native American Heritage Month, we could have an Asian American, now Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders are included in that, and that it wasn't until 1976, post-civil rights, that these months were even instituted. And I want to honor that one of the impacts of this is that the people whose blood was shed in order for us to get these months, and yes, these months are frustrating and complicated, as we've just said, get the shortest month. I'm not okay with that.
That is true. I never thought of that, but
and on university campuses, it's still very much these months, and your programming is done, like I used to have to create programming for college students, and we were still structured by these months. And we were still in the sort of what I call the food festival fun mode of heritage. And we haven't moved past that. TBH, it's really still that way on university campuses. So that's probably one of the functions of why you're getting chosen for a particular month and not for others, because you can't be multiple identified according to those, checklists and surveys and so on.
you can't have too many months, Celeste. You can't have too many months.
Oh my goodness. And I had someone tell me in deep pain this week that they were feeling a lot of erasure during May, that they had also pitched a piece to one of these literary magazines and it had been declined, and that they were just really feeling that the month brings additional harm, that it's supposed to be a month where you supposedly get airtime and then you don't.
Yeah.
So for many of us, I think this month isn't what is purported to be.
Yeah. I think for me, I guess speaking of erasure, I face erasure in a completely different way, which I think that's not necessarily something we talk about, because obviously AANHPI Month is to center, American voices, Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander voices. And we lose half of them in the celebration, but we can come back to that. But for me, not being Asian American, one of the things that I notice is that, I am obviously very, loud and proud about my identity, being Bangladeshi, being Irish. I don't try to hide that I'm not American. My books are set in Ireland. They feature Bengali Irish people, but I still find myself showing up on all of these lists for specifically celebrating AANHPI Month. And I find it, I understand people have good intentions. They want to, celebrate me as an Asian person, but it is erasure of my identity and who I am, and also who I'm writing. So in that way, I definitely face that erasure. But on the other hand of that, I've actually had this month specifically, I had somebody who was Asian American and who messaged me after one of these lists, which I did not engage with because I don't engage with lists that misidentify me. And so she messaged me and she said, "You are on this list," and I wasn't. And I was kind of like, yes, you're right. Like, I was on this list, but I didn't create the list. I didn't ask to be on the list. I understand that you heard that, you are Asian American and you're not on it. And I'm not Asian American and I am on it, but I'm not the person who perpetuated the hurt. So why am I the person who gets erased, but also gets accused of taking up a space? And similarly, I often get invited to do events specifically talking about this Heritage Month. And I have to navigate, like, do I pass up an opportunity that I would not get otherwise? Or do I sit there and let my identity be erased? And again, at the same time, I get invited to events where I'll be told, this is an event to talk about being Asian. So last year I got invited to a panel for queer Asians, which, there are not a lot of us here. There are not a lot of us writing this identity. And And I was excited. I was like, yes, I would love to be on this panel for queer Asians. And I got on the panel, and the introduction was queer Asian American authors writing queer Asian American identities. And at that point, it was too late. I couldn't say, oh, I can't be on this panel because I'm not Asian American. That's a completely different conversation. So in all of these ways, hurt has been perpetrated against me in various different ways, and I have been erased, but nobody ever sees that they're doing it. So it's quite frustrating to not really be able to have this conversation. So that's why I get very, very frustrated in May. I'm always like dreading it. Even my literary agent, he has seen me in these big lists, and he's DM'd me and said, you're on this list, but I know you're not Asian American. So it's frustrating for all of us, but it's just something that I have to kind of suck up and deal with.
And at what point do these Heritage Months then become one more way in which we are tokenized, and how we inadvertently uphold white supremacist ideologies, right? That's a question I sit with as well. That very much an impact, not only the erasure and the harm that you just brace yourself for, and then, even participating in doing anything of that nature can be also a function of sort of upholding the false narrative that, oh, look, we are such a, for lack of a better word, diverse. That's a word I want to remove from our vocabulary, but that's how we get, sort of the narrative is very much about, oh, look, we're celebrating, but then we're not, So the question I saw in the chat might be one that we entertain now, which is, that I think about who do we need to be mindful of during this month? And how can we be more inclusive? There are two questions from the same participant. Thank you for that question.
I think what I would say is we need to be very aware of what actually is Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander identity. Because first of all, the people who always gets left out are the Pacific Islanders and the Native Hawaiians. So if you see 10 lists for this month, I can guarantee that not one will include a single person who is Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, which is ridiculous because it is also their month. So I think that is something we have to be very, very cognizant of. But secondly, we also have to be cognizant of all of the different Asian identities that are also often very much excluded. This May, I feel like every day or every week, I see somebody who is South Asian or West Asian or Southeast Asian saying, don't leave us out of your list. So who is getting included if we're all frustrated? And then of course, Indo-Caribbeans, all of the South Asians in the African diaspora, like all of these people need to be included in these lists, but they are always left out. So I think we have to make that effort because it's not going to come easy to us. A lot of these voices are missing. A lot of these voices, they may not be, traditionally published. You may have to dig deep to find those voices, but it's up to you to do that work, and we all need to be doing that work.
Yeah, that was really well said. I wish I could add something to it, but no, I think always just giving someone a list of things and saying this is what you should do is never as helpful as encouraging them to educate themselves about about what is included, about actually I myself didn't even know about the other part, the Native Hawaiian and Pacific. I never really knew about that until this that was the rest of it. So it's a process of educating yourself and getting into the spaces and engaging with people outside of just those narrow lists, you know, and asking a question, and as that person has done. Because if you just sit there and receive what the industry tells you should be on that list, you'll never really know.
I concur. And the way that I like to think of it, and I speak of it in Unbelonging, is sort of the notion of center and margin, right? So let's say this is the list, right? And the people who make the list tend to be sort of US based folks of East Asian descent. Those are the people that tend to be prioritized during this month, according to my observation, and I may be wrong. And so then I ask myself, you know, well, who's at the margins, right? So if they're in the center, and who's at the margins? And so what ends up happening is that intersectionality is completely kind of overlooked, right? Sort of, as we were saying, the multiracial component, the diasporic component, and also the intersectional component. So what I notice often is dark-skinned Muslim people, Palestinian people, you know, all of those folks are part of AANHPI and very rarely are considered so. And so there are the marginalized of the marginalized within our category, and we need to figure out how we can bring attention to learning about the margins. And so very often with co-learners, that's where we go with this inquiry, is to say, well, you know, who's not here? Who's in the margins, and who is in the margins of the margins, and how could we center them in our conversations? And those are questions that are open-ended. I don't have answers for that, but that's the inquiry that I tend to sort of go into.
Something I have always wondered about since I started writing is also, as you said, performative. Is it that I have to write about an Indo-Caribbean protagonist in order to qualify, for my book to qualify, and, you know, to be on those lists? Because it shouldn't be. It should be that, and I don't even mean just me, it should be that an author of Indo-Caribbean heritage whose book comes out in the US, should be enough. It shouldn't be that I should have to perform by making my protagonist of this particular ethnicity in order to be considered. You know what I mean? Would a book that contains multiple ethnicities like mine, would a book that contains a protagonist that is maybe, yes, okay, in the Caribbean, but not, doesn't speak the language, or is not really steeped in the culture of East Asia, would such a book qualify? I don't know. I don't know if it is the content that matters, or is it the author? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think for me, when I think of, like, personally, unfortunately, publishing does not subscribe to this, I think. But when I think of inclusion and when I think of representation, I'm thinking of the author, not necessarily the characters. Because if an author is not, you know, a person of color, if an author is not of that specific identity, why do I really care if the character is? Because to me, that's not inclusion. You know, it's white supremacy basically putting on brown face or black face. So that's what I care about. I don't think publishing always cares about this. And I think even our wider community doesn't always understand the nuance of this. So my next book, my upcoming book, it's a historical which has 4 characters, and 2 of the characters are white. One of them is Italian, one of them is Spanish, one of them is Croatian, one of them is South Asian, and then one of them is Haitian French, so she's Black. And so when I had my cover reveal for that book, one of the first questions I got from someone was, do you consider this book South Asian? Of course I consider the book South Asian because I'm South Asian. Why would it not be South Asian? Even if there was no South Asian character, it would still be a South Asian book because I'm South Asian. But it just astonished me that somebody asked me this question, and the person was South Asian. So I just thought it was very interesting. But, for me, all the books I write are always going to be South Asian by virtue of me being South Asian. That's my voice. That's who I am. And, I think the same for you, Celeste. Whatever books you write are going to be Indo-Caribbean to me. So publishing may not think so, our wider community may not think so, but I definitely will.
And I guess the litmus test kind of is, if a white person writes a book, does anybody ask them about white people? Would it be on this list or that list? Nobody asks that question. So, it's just that this person is whatever that this person is, and you just take it and that. So I would really like to see publishing move in that direction, in terms of not asking authors to pigeonhole themselves or to write into pre-existing narratives of what we are.
Or be asked to decide who is included and who's not. Because very often we are then put in that, not just a pigeonhole, but also we're then asked to say, well, who should be included and who shouldn't be included. And just that identity policing alone is really deeply harmful and traumatic. I think it was part of the background conversation for getting us together in this Zoom room was to complicate what can happen when we are pigeonholed, when we are tokenized, when we are flattened out. And then we are put in a place to try to decide who should be here and who not. I wish us to be just all of ourselves, and we're still not there. We're still not in a place where we could just write our stories as is without having to be asked the kinds of questions the two of you just shared. And why are we identity policing ourselves and each other during a Heritage Month? Why? And we are.
Yeah, it becomes something that you have to think about.
Because ultimately, I think the reason why we're doing this is because at the end of the day, a lot of us during these Heritage Months are not celebrating our heritages. We're performing for other people, and not even necessarily white people. Sometimes we're even performing for people from our community. And we're kind of saying, oh, look, here's all of these Asian authors that I want to celebrate. Who do you want to celebrate? But I think, I don't personally know how this Heritage Month specifically came about, but I think, all Heritage Months have a specific history, and they are about celebrating our history, celebrating our achievements, not just token lists of here's books to read. I think that we need to aim to be a little bit deeper than that.
Speaking about celebrating our history and looking at it from that perspective, it's an opportunity. I see these months as an opportunity to use it to do just that and to educate people. It's our chance to say, like we're saying, do you know that, Southeast Asian heritage in the Americas, the earliest wave was these people? Do you know that, this was the first wave? And it's like using it to kind of talk about the history and not just wave a flag conveniently and sell books.
And what I often, the educator hat that I put on is, that we aren't taught those. And so that's the other thing, is that we're still in that food fund festival mode at university level. So I know that in elementary and high schools, the librarians and teachers who might be looking at these lists to maybe bring, books to high school age students and so on, would maybe listen to our conversation and take from that, a few of our pointers around, the importance of nuance, the importance of really paying attention to how authors self-identify, and those kinds of nuanced sort of paying attention, reflect, go deeper, learn more, peel away at the layers of from the food fun mode to something deeper, really is my wish for where we go with this, right? And not restricted just to a month or a day, right? Like we're living in a time where especially capitalist instincts are taking days and months like this and really making of them something really murky. And yes, today was the news where I was like, you're gonna sell an ice cream, you're gonna sell Juneteenth Walmart. Like that's the world we're living in today. And that's one of the risks and dangers that we slip into when we don't pay attention to what these months can become.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, from my perspective, I mean, this of course is a step in the right direction. And also what I've noticed is there is a generation that is coming, that is here now. I mean, that was born, like a generation of Asians that were born in America, young people who they are American, but they're also Asian, and they kind of caught in between cultures, unlike maybe their parents who immigrated. So they're American, just like there are people in the Caribbean who are Caribbean, but at the same time they have their Indian heritage, and there are people in Ireland who might be born in Ireland but to Asian parents. So there's this generation of young people who all have that same in-betweenness in common, and it's about hoping that these young people, because of technology and because of having broader minds and mindsets, that they are able to connect. I was so happy to see what you had sent me recently, Gayatri. I think it was a video of this guy on stage performing and shouting out the Southeast Asian community and deliberately mentioning in the Caribbean people. That's young people. For me, I was so happy. I was like, look what they're doing, And I have been invited. I was invited to be on a panel. I wasn't able to make it, but it brought me real joy to see. It's a panel being led by a university actually in India. And they send out this Zoom link to so many different places everywhere that they can reach diasporic peoples and invite, come and chat with us. And it's a way for like all these different people to get in the same room and talk about these things, and that made me very happy to see that happening. And I feel like the pandemic did some good, because before everybody was on Zoom, that probably wouldn't have happened, because we would be in our little enclaves, So I'm kind of hopeful because of younger people and how I see things going with that.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people are also just setting things up, hopefully, to educate the younger generation. Because I guess one of the difficulties about a younger generation coming in is that even we may not know a lot of the history, just because, as Gayatri said, we haven't been taught it. And a lot of us don't have access to it. So what happens with each new generation is that more and more of that history gets erased. So, I guess what I hope is that we use these heritage months to really dig into our history and leave that behind for the younger generations to pick it up, and also, for them to dig deep, and for our history to kind of be recovered. I know that My little sister, she's not she wasn't born here, but she came here when she was 2 months old. So essentially she is that generation. So, you know, I know that with my little sister, she doesn't necessarily have that like knowledge of that history. So a lot of the times something that is so obvious to me of, you know, Bangladeshi history, I'll say it and she'll be like, what's that? And I'm like, you don't know that? And I have to explain it to her. So, you know, I'm always aware that so much of our history, like I may think everybody knows it, but the younger generation don't necessarily have the access to it. So I think that's an important thing that we need to set up for the younger generation, educating them, ensuring that they have access to the histories that we may not even have access to, and just leaving that legacy behind.
And I think as word artists, as storytellers, as creatives, especially those of us who create for young people, there's so much opportunity there to take some of what we're conveying and to bring it to our stories, and to take those risks. You know, I feel like, you know, because we are in this environment that expects us to flatten ourselves out, telling those layered stories that are informed by deep history and exploration and research, you know, is a risky thing to do. And that, you know, that when we work together and converse with each other, you know, maybe I'm braver. Maybe I'm braver that I'm going to be even more kind of forward about the intersectional identities and, you know, diaspora, and sort of like being able to express all of the nuances that we are told to edit out, and to sort of, you know, that as writers and storytellers in particular, I feel like there's an opportunity for us to do more of that, which would basically mean that we would not make the lists, right? Because the more risk taking we do, and the more that we color off the edges, the more we get into the margins of the margins, right? The more complicated it becomes, because then which month are we going to be in? So you're going to be in February and in May and in June and in, you know, and then they can't categorize us anymore. And maybe that's the next step.
Yeah. I think
Make it murkier.
I think just, you know, also having conversations where we talk about what we have in common, you know, things we have in common, and not always, you know, just what's different. But I'm sure if we really, really sat down, there's so much that we have in common. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't even matter where you're located. It's a shared history.
Yeah. Yeah. I was doing a meditation on that earlier this week by looking at a recipe from that cookbook I had shared.
Yeah.
And it was a recipe for Bengan choka. And I was like, listen here, Bengan is a diasporic pyar boli, as in a love language. So if we sat down and talked about the ways the Bengali people, Punjabi people, and Indo-Caribbean people fix Bengan and what that means, how do you say eggplant in Bengali?
Begun.
See, so it's like literally almost, see, that's what I'm saying. Like that could be a whole conversation, just eggplant.
Baigan. Baigan choka.
Yeah, and we call it Bengan bharta, the Punjabi people. And it's a dish that I don't know how to make. And we do it the same way. We char it over like open flame. And then we prepare it in very similar way that y'all do it in Trinidad. And please don't get me started about doubles, because that in itself is a diasporic love language. And I know I said we shouldn't talk about food, but really food is living history.
It is. Food is love. Yeah. Now you have me thinking about bacon.
See, I told you. You told me think about what we have in common. Look, even the word is similar in Bengali, Punjabi, and Indo-Caribbean.
I learned something tonight. Well, how do you say it, Adiba?
Begun.
Okay. And you say what, Gayatri?
Bengan.
So that's the closest to what we say, baigan. Yeah. Baigan choka, which basically is baba ganoush. That's what the Arabic people call baba ganoush, right?
Exactly. Let's see, I think this might be a good time to invite attendees to ask us questions. I think we've answered the ones that are already in the chat. Adiba, maybe you can read better than I can. I can't quite read as well. I think we
I think we have answered all of them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Was there anything else on your heart, Adiba, that we didn't get to say?
I mean, I guess we could kind of expand a little bit on this. In the event description, it mentions who is included and who's excluded. Can you please expand on that? We did talk a little bit about that, but maybe we could expand a little bit more.
Well, I think Indo-Caribbean people aren't included. We said that. Biracially Black people are not included. We said that. You know, I feel like multiracial people sometimes who are multiracially white are included, which I do see happening. So really it's complicated about, you know, the list is long of people who aren't included, in my opinion. You know, people who don't have caste privilege or educational privilege, people who don't have kind of the resources to be able to you know, and then people who are outnumbered, people who are, you know, so-called refugees from places that no longer exist due to empire. You know, like those people don't make those lists, right? Like people who don't have a passport or a nationality of origin anymore because they've been multiply displaced by empire. Those people don't make these lists. So I could just go on and on. I could just do you a whole like ad lib on who's not included.
I think we can also maybe go a little further and talk about not just who is included and excluded in these specific lists, but also who is included and excluded in publishing. Because I think, you know, one of the things that I have seen crop up in social media is this, you know, why are Pacific Islanders so excluded from a lot of these lists? And on the one hand, yes, it's because people aren't making the effort to include Pacific Islander people. But on the other hand, it's because publishing has not included them. It's very, very difficult to find traditionally published books by Pacific Islander authors. So, you know, if I go to make a list of YA books by, you know, Asian, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander authors, I may find 300 books by Asian Americans and probably no books by a Native Hawaiian person, maybe one book by a Pacific Islander person. So I think we need to have a wider conversation than just who is included and excluded from these lists, but we need to talk about who is publishing allowing into the folds and who is publishing not allowing into the folds. Even speaking of, you know, South Asia, I am one of the few Bangladeshi authors publishing in North America currently. I think there's 3 of us who have published a book. So that is a really small number, and Bangladesh may be a small country, but we are a massive population, especially in the diaspora. But, you know, there's so many voices missing from South Asia and the diaspora. Where are the authors from Singapore, from Nepal, from Afghanistan, from Bhutan, from the Maldives? Like, all of these voices have specifically not been included by publishing. So, you know, I can make an effort to say, I'm going to make a list, I'm going to include everybody, you know, from the South Asian diaspora, I'm going to include Indo-Caribbeans, I'm going to include people from the African diaspora, all of these people. But if their books are not there, how can I include them? It's impossible. So yeah, I think it's a wider conversation and we need to be having that.
We're inviting more questions and we still have a few more minutes. So if there was anything else we didn't get to say or a question that we want to raise, you know, I think what you just said really had me to come back to, you know, we're functioning in systems that are racist systems that are exclusionary, and that we, in many ways are trying to, at the same time, function as kind of all of ourselves, but also as we navigate all of the various harms that we mentioned. So it's kind of a lot. And I don't know about y'all, but are you tired of educating people about identity and the layers of, I'd rather be doing the conversations that Celeste was inviting about what we have in common and how we can build solidarity and how we can, heal, like how we can create a space like this in which none of us technically fit into this category. I don't, because I'm not American. I don't hold an American passport. I just live here. And so, and yet we're taking space. We just took space. We're like, okay, this is a Heritage Month that makes it possible for us who might not be included in this category to have a conversation, because we are in relation to, we are in connection with each other. And we have something to say about this conversation. And I'm tired.
No, but I think what you said there it's so important. And I don't want to use the word disruptors, but sometimes you have to, but that's one useful way to make the most of the month, to disrupt what would be the normal conversation and say, hey, which is exactly what we're doing now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think Firestorm helps us do that. I think this is that the cooperative is a space that is radically oriented in really advocating for us to become disruptors. And I think that's why it made sense for us to have this conversation in this space, because I don't see them tokenizing us, but rather opening the door for us to complicate things. And I really am thankful for that.
So am I. So am I.
I just wanted to say thank you all for having this conversation together. And yeah, there are so many insights that I have some of my own thinking to do about my own Asian American identity as well. And I really just appreciate all of you for being here. Thank you so much. I'm not sure if we have any more questions, but if any of y'all had any last minute thoughts or just anything else you wanted to add. If not, I guess it's time to say goodbye for the night.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank all the conversation partners, and thank you, Glenda. And I really hope that moving forward, people have more to think about and more to reflect on. And I would invite all of us to do just that, is to ask questions, even if we didn't have conclusive answers. I think my earnest hope is that we raise some important questions that will lead to more conversations and possibly actions.
Definitely. Yes. Thanks so much, guys and gals. I should have said gals.
Oh, it was lovely to be in this virtual space together. Oh yeah, maybe we could do that. Can we take a picture together?
Do you have
Can we hold up our books and take a picture? Do you have a screenshot you can do? Adiba, do you have a screenshot you can do?
Yes.
Please do. I'm going to trust you to do the screenshot.
Okay. I will.
Oops.
Okay, I've done the screenshot. Hopefully it will actually save onto my computer.
Well, thank you.
If it doesn't, you can't blame me. No, I've tried.
You tried. Thank you, everyone who joined us, and everyone who's going to listen to us later, because that is also one thing, is anyone who's going to join us. I think we are in a good place to conclude now.
Have a good evening, everyone.
All right.
Thank you
night,
so much.
everyone. Thank you. Bye,
Bye.
Glenda. Thank you, Firestorm.
Bye.